Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to a session covering 8.3 and 8.4 comparisons and superlatives. If you're working out of the Vistas book, the comparison information starts on page 281, and it goes all the way through to page, let's see, through page 283. So 281 to 283 is the comparisons, and then the next section is the superlatives, and they start on page 286. With this information, they kind of go hand in hand, so we'll be presenting them together, talking about them in general, and then looking specifically at the comparisons and then at the superlatives. Essentially, both Spanish and English, of course, use comparisons to indicate which of two people or things has lesser, equal, or greater degree of equality. For example, I am taller than you. She is smarter than me. He has more patience than I do. She has less talent for working with small children than he does. You can make any kind of comparison of inequality. An equal comparison would be, for example, someone saying, I'm just as smart as you are. I'm just as tall as you are. I'm just as good a teacher as you are. Those are just some examples of comparisons of equality. You're taking two people or things and comparing them. And the comparison can either be that one's better than the other, or one's worse than the other, or that they're equally as good. A superlative is the way you express the highest or lowest degree of equality. For example, the word best, the word worst, tallest, smallest, biggest, most patient. You are like the be-all to end-all in a good way or a bad way, and that's called a superlative, and that's vocab from English grammar. It may just not be vocab that you're familiar with, but that's what a superlative is. You're the one of the two extremes. Okay, just seeing the difference here. These are some of the examples that I was using. A comparison, something can be less interesting, menos interesante, más grande, tan sabroso como. This is one of a comparison of inequality, as is bigger, más grande. The tan sabroso como is a comparison of equality. The two things are just as delicious as each other. A superlative, on the other hand, is, as I mentioned, the highest or the lowest quality possible. So la mejor or el mejor is the best. La peor or el peor is the worst. And la más alta, for example, is the tallest. And what we're going to be looking at today are how you form these phrases to create these comparisons or to use superlatives when you're talking and when you're writing in Spanish. First, we're going to talk about the comparisons. For any comparison of inequality, when the two things aren't equal, you put either más, which means more, or menos, which means less, before either an adjective, an adverb, or a noun, and then que. So the formula again, you put más or menos, then the adjective, an adverb, or a noun, whatever it is you happen to be describing, and then whatever it is you're comparing it to. We'll see some examples here in just a second with adjectives, then adverbs, then nouns. So first let's look at comparisons of inequality with adjectives. For example, los bistecs son más caros que el pollo. And if you'll remember the formula, you need más or menos, and you've got más here. Then an adjective, caros means expensive than the chicken. So it's saying the steaks are more expensive than the chicken. The next example, estas uvas son menos sabrosas que esa pera. These grapes are less tasty than that pear. And here again, the formula was either más o menos, an adjective, and then the word que, and that's exactly what you have here. So essentially at the beginning of this sentence, you're going to have a person or a thing that you're comparing, then the expression of comparison, then the thing that it was compared to. Let's look at examples with adverbs. For example, me acuesto más tarde que tú. Same formula. You're going to have the word más or menos, either an adjective, adverb, or a noun. In this case, we have adverbs. Que, and then whoever you're comparing it to. Me acuesto más tarde que tú. I go to bed later than you do. Mi hermano se despierta menos temprano que yo. My brother wakes up less early than I do. And in English, typically for us that sounds awkward to say my brother wakes up less early than I do. Another way to say it could be he wakes up later than I do. The point I want you to get here is that it's not necessarily awkward in Spanish. Okay, we wouldn't necessarily say it that way in English, but you would in Spanish. All right, comparisons with nouns are going to be the exact same formula again. You'll have más o menos, either your adjective, adverb, or noun, and then the word que. So in this example, Juan prepara más platos que José. Juan prepares more dishes than José. You've got your más, and then you have a noun here rather than an adjective or adverb, and the word que, but the formula is exactly the same. The second example, Susana come menos carne que Enrique. Susan eats less meat than Enrique. And you'll notice on all of these that in parentheses it's implied. The word does is implied. And I can always tell the students who are plagiarizing and cheating and using online translation programs because they'll have something else here in their Spanish, thinking that they need that word there. And if you'll just study the material, you can show me what you know based on what you've learned in the book rather than trying to use a translation program that once you learn a little bit more Spanish, you'll realize how terrible they are. Okay, but anyway, with the noun, in comparisons of inequality, you're going to follow the same formula. Más or menos, the noun, and then que. Okay, in English, we have a lot of words that are irregular. English has a comparative form for short adjectives, such as taller or shorter. Such forms do not exist in Spanish. And as I was saying earlier, this may seem awkward to you to say more tall, because in English we don't say that. We don't say I'm more short than you or I'm more shorter than you. And that's one of the things that makes English so hard to learn is we do have a lot of irregularities too. So just know that it looks awkward if you're doing a literal translation, more tall than, yo soy más alta que tú, I am more tall than you. But just know that in Spanish that is actually correct. When a comparison involves a numerical expression, de is used before the number instead of que. So if you want to say there are more than 50 oranges or I arrived in less than 10 minutes, traditionally que is the word that means than, but in these comparisons, if you're using an actual number word, then you'll use de rather than que. Okay, when you are using a verb to have that be the point of comparison, the following construction is used. So remember, on the previous slides, we were working with adjectives, adverbs, and nouns, and the formula was más o menos, then your adjective, adverb, or noun, and then the word que. If you're going to be talking about a verb as the point of comparison, first you'll put the verb, then you put either más o menos, then the word que. So the order is a little bit different, and this is what you're responsible for memorizing so that you can form these sentences correctly both in your spoken language and in your written language. For example, mis hermanos comen más que yo. My brothers eat more than I do. And here the verb is comen. And what do they eat? More than I. Arturo duerme menos que su padre. Arturo sleeps less than his father does. Okay? And remember that the do or does is included in the verb in Spanish. In English, we need that helping verb of do or does. In Spanish, it's implied and included in the present tense form of the verb, duerme or comen. There are also comparisons where the two things you're comparing are equal. They're just as whatever you want to say about them as each other. And this is how you'll do this. If you're using an adjective or an adverb, you'll use the word tan, then the adjective or the adverb, and then como, and then whoever it is or whatever it is. It's just as, whatever as. That sounds really specific, huh? But you'll see what I mean in just a second. If you're using a noun, for example, saying there's just as many people in my class as in yours, then you would use tanto or tanta, tantos, or tantas. Essentially, the way this is written here, I want you to understand that there's 4 ways to write out the word tanto, but make it agree with gender and number. That's what we always have to do when we're working with our nouns. So you would have a form of the word tanto, then a noun, and then the word como. And let's look at a few examples of comparisons of equality. Este plato es tan delicioso como aquel. This dish is delicious as that one is. And again, the is included. All right. And here again, the formula was tan, and then delicioso is an adjective, and then the word como. Ustedes probaron tantos platos como ellos. You tried as many dishes as they did. And here, platos is a noun, so we had to make tantos agree with it. See the OS on tantos and the OS on platos, and the two are agreeing because platos is a noun. Hopefully that makes sense for you. The next thing that I want to look at is just another way of saying what we've already been working with, to be sure that you're aware that tanto, when you're using it with a noun, whether it be plural or singular, it is working sort of as an adjective. So it has to agree in gender and number. And that's what we were talking about just a second ago, that tanto, tanta, tantos, tantas are the different ways to write it out. Sometimes it helps just to see it. And hopefully you can see that. But those are the 4 different ways that you can use the word tanto, and you will use it here. If you're using it in this form, it'll be going with a noun. So if there's as many students, tantos estudiantes. If there is as much milk in my cup as there is in yours, tanta leche. If there's as much money in your account as there is in mine, hay tanto dinero en mi cuenta y en la tuya, ¿verdad? Tan and tanto can also be used for emphasis rather than to compare. So just be aware that you may see them meaning so or so much or so many. Tu almuerzo es tan grande, comes tanto, comes tantas manzanas. It can be used something to create emphasis. Okay, we talked about creating comparisons of equality with adjectives and adverbs and nouns. Now we're going to look at how to do it with a verb. When you are making a comparison of equality with a verb, you have to put the word tanto como after the verb. And then in this construction, because you're using it with a verb, you don't agree in gender and number. It's always going to be the words tanto como. For example, no duermo tanto como mi tía. I don't sleep as much as my aunt. Estudiamos tanto como ustedes. We study as much as you. And again, you're using a verb to be the point of comparison. I sleep as much as my aunt. or I don't sleep as much as my aunt. We study as much as you guys do. Okay. The next thing that I want us to look at before we move on to the superlatives is just a little bit of the practice. And this, if you're using your book, would be the Inténtalo practice from page 283. And here, they're giving you the type of comparison word that they want you to use. These are comparisons either of equality or inequality. They're not superlatives because we haven't gotten to them yet. So this first one would be Ernesto mira más televisión than. In this case, as long as we're not working with a number word, you can use que as the word for than. And then here we want to use the word less. Tú eres menos simpático. Oh, and it ran over. Menos simpático que Federico. The word there is supposed to be menos. M-E-N-O-S. Número 3. La camarera sirve tanta carne como pescado. And I've chosen the word tanta because the word carne is feminine. And remember, when you're doing comparisons with nouns, carne como pescado, you have to make the tanta agree with the word, with the noun carne. Conozco más restaurantes que tú. I know more restaurants than you. I'm familiar with more restaurants. And here, when you're doing this on your test Sunday or whenever you take it, be sure you include your accent marks. No estudio, and this is as much as. And the way we create that when the point of comparison is a verb, remember, is always just going to be the word tanto como, the expression tanto como. I'm trying to find a place to put this so it won't run into everything. Tanto como. And it's because the point of comparison is a verb, so we're not having to make anything agree in gender or number. Sabes jugar tenis tan bien como tu hermana. Put this in here, como. And then puedes beber as many refrescos como yo. And here you would use the word, a form of the word tanto. And because refrescos is plural and it's masculine, we're going to go with tantos. Mis amigos parecen tan simpáticos como ustedes. And with this, the point of comparison is being as nice as, and you're going to use just the word tan with an adjective. Okay? Hopefully, if you guys have any questions, you can send me an email. I'll be happy to help you with these. The next part that we want to look at are the superlatives. Superlatives, if you'll remember, are when an expression is of the highest or lowest quality possible. So it's the be-all to end-all, if you will. Essentially, the construction that's used, the way you form a superlative, and this information, if you're wanting to follow along or cross-reference in your book, is on page 286 in the Vistas book. To form superlatives, you have an article, and then the noun, and then the word más o menos, and then an adjective, and then the word de. All right? And the more and more of these you practice, the more this formula won't sound so foreign to you. It'll make more sense. Essentially, you have to include the definite article with your noun, and then you either saying it's more or less, whatever your adjective is, than, okay? Than or of. Okay, the first example here, es el café más rico del país. It's the most delicious coffee in the country. Es el menú menos caro de todos estos. It's the least expensive menu of all of these. And here, you're not saying that it's more expensive than, that McDonald's is more expensive than Wendy's, or that, Colombian coffee is better than Puerto Rican coffee. You're saying that it is the best in the whole country. All right, that's what a superlative is by definition. It's the best or the worst. While más alone means more, after el o la, it means most. Okay? If you use it by itself, it means more. When you use it with el or la or los or las, it means most. Okay, what this is saying is that you can leave out the noun in a superlative statement if the noun is clear, whatever the noun is that you're referring to is clear. For example, if just are talking with someone and the line of conversation or dialogue follows el restaurante El Cráter, oh, es el más elegante de la ciudad. And the understanding is that you're still talking about the Cráter restaurant. Recomiendo el pollo asado. Es el más sabroso del menú. It's the most delicious on the menu. And what we must be talking about is el pollo asado because we just spoke about it. All right, you can do it with or without the noun included. What I want us to look at right here are some of the adjectives that you're familiar with and the word you'll use if you're making a comparison of equality or inequality, and then also how it will look when you're using it in the superlative, when it's the be-all to end-all, either the biggest, the smallest, etc. For example, bueno means good. Mejor, right? We don't say in English or in Spanish, I'm more good at that than you are. We say I'm better at that than you are. Okay? Malo, there again, too, you're not going to say I'm more bad than you. You say I'm worse than you. Grande, there too, it's not that I'm more big. You can say más grande, though. But there is a word mayor in Spanish that means bigger. And if you're saying el mayor or la mayor, it's saying you're the biggest or the oldest. For example, in my family, I'm older than my sister is, so I'm the oldest. I can say yo soy la mayor, I'm the oldest. Pequeño significa small, and menor means smaller. It also means younger if you're talking about age. So joven means young, and you can, it is correct to say más joven or más viejo to say that. But typically when you're talking about a person's age, for sure you would use the words menor and mayor. All right? Those are there just for your reference. Yeah, and this is what I just said. When you're using grande or pequeño to refer to an age, the irregular comparative and superlative forms mayor and menor are used, rather than using más grande or más pequeño if you're referring typically to a living thing's age. If they're talking about size, like how big something is, then you will use the más or the menos grande or más o menos pequeño. Here's some examples. Isabel, which of course is a person, so we're going to use es la mayor de su familia. We'll use that irregular superlative, Isabel es la mayor de su familia, rather than saying Isabel es la más grande de su familia. Because when you're talking about age, it's preferred to use mayor or menor. Tu ensalada es más grande que esa. And of course, a salad is not a living thing. So it's okay to say, if you're talking about how big something is when you're referring to size, es más grande que esa. Yo soy menor que tú is referring to my own age being younger than yours. And with that, again, you'll go with the irregular comparative, which is either mayor or menor when you're talking about somebody's age. Pedí el plato más pequeño del menú. I ordered the smallest dish on the menu. Here it is again using smallest or if it were talking about age, younger. But here we're talking about size, and so it's the smallest sized dish on the menu. If you're working with the adjectives bien and mal, they have the same irregular comparative forms is the adjectives bueno and malo. So Julio nada mejor que los otros chicos. Julio swims better than the other boys. You wouldn't say nada más bien que los otros chicos. Ellas cantan peor que las otras chicas. They sing worse than the other girls, and you would not necessarily say ellas cantan menos bien que las otras chicas. You would use the irregular comparative peor. All right. Okay, just so you can get a point of reference for what this is in English as a comparison point, an absolute superlative is when you're saying extremely, exceptionally, super, or very before an adjective or adverb. And if you think about especially adolescents, um, tweens and young teens tend to exaggerate everything, and something isn't so funny. It's so funny, or you're too cute. You know, you go on and on and on with the adjectives. I was very scared when people are, typically they won't write that unless they're writing maybe in their diary or something, but for sure we all know people who talk that way. And in Spanish, the way that is formed is called an absolute superlative, and what you do is you add ísimo or ísima to the end of the word. Let's look at how that's going to happen here. Okay, to form the absolute superlative, basically what you're going to do is if the word ends in a vowel, you're going to drop it, and then you're going to add ísimo or ísima, and of course, since these are adjectives, you can make them singular, plural, masculine, feminine to agree with whatever you're talking about. So, for example, to say this steak is very bad, like it's the worst ever, it's it's not just bad, it's very bad. El bistec está malísimo. If somebody eats a lot, not just, a lot, but very much. Comes muchísimo. And this one, esta prueba es dificilísima. This quiz is really hard. It's harder than they usually are. To say los exámenes son facilísimos is to say that tests are extremely easy. And essentially all you're doing is taking any adjective that you want or adverb, drop the vowel if it has one on the end, and then add ísimo or ísima. And actually, we'll talk about that in just a second. There's some irregulars that are on the next slide. I won't say that right now, but in Spanish, too, people exaggerate things even more than this, like we would in English. Instead of saying the steak is very bad, we may say the steak was very bad. And in Spanish, people will add on ísimos on the end of it to get that same effect of drama and exaggeration. So you would say el bistec está malísimo, and you will hear that especially if you put on the telenovelas on the Spanish channel, or if you listen to the radio in Spanish. You won't necessarily see it too often in written Spanish, nor will you see it in English written, but spoken you will hear it. So keep an ear out for that. There's a few irregularities when you're working with these absolute superlatives. If the adjective ends in C, G, or Z, remember your car, gar, and zar verbs that we just worked with in the last section? Remember the C has to change to QU, the G had to change to GU, and the Z had to change to C when you were talking about the yo form and the preterite for like tocar, llegar. Remember those? Almorzar. Same idea here. Rico would become riquísimo. You're not just rich, you're very rich. Or rico también significa delicious. So it could be the most delicious. Largo sería larguísimo. Feliz, felicísimo. So super long or super happy. Very happy. You've got the idea there at least. Let's see. There's one more here. Let's wait for it to pull up. There we go. If your adjective ends in an N or an R, usually you'll form the absolute superlative by adding not just isimo, but sisimo. The C has to be there to make it, to bridge that sound. So joven would be jovencísimo. Trabajador sería trabajadorcísimo. And I'm trying to think of another one just as an example. And of course, my mind's drawing a total blank about adjectives that end in N or R. Maybe you guys can think of some and email them to me. I can't think of any right now. Let's do a little bit of practice with the superlatives then. Okay, some of these are going to be just regular superlatives, and some of them are going to be the absolute superlatives. And you can tell by the description that's given here. So the most intelligent, Marissa is the most intelligent of all. The way you're going to do this is put your el, la, los, or las, and then the word for most, and then the adjective inteligente. So here, my noun, my person is Marisa. She's a girl. So I'm going to type this up here. Actually, I'm going to type it over here to the side so you can see it really well. La más inteligente de todas. Marisa es la más inteligente de todas. And the reason why I put la is because we're working with Marisa, and she's feminine and she's singular. All right? Ricardo y Tomás son, and then it says the least boring of the party. And what's implied there is that they're the least boring people of the party. So what we need to do here is, would we use el, la, los, or las to refer to Ricardo y Tomás? And in this case, we would use los, because it would be like los chicos or los muchachos, los menos aburridos de la fiesta. And here, the least boring, aburrido is the word for boring, and we have to make it agree with who it is that we're talking about, Ricardo y Tomás. So they're plural, they're more than one person, and they're masculine. So aburridos is the noun, the adjective rather, that we choose there. All right, this next one, Miguel y Antonio son the worst students in the class. So here, rather than using más o menos, the worst is actually one of those irregular superlatives. So los peores. Son los peores estudiantes de la clase. You could, some students may have wanted to put here, son los más malos, because you know that mal means bad. So if you're like the worst one, you're the most bad one. And if you'll refer back to that chart on page 286 of irregular superlatives, in Spanish, you can't say the most bad, más malos. And so you can't in English either, but sometimes things it seems like we can do in English, but we can't in Spanish, and then other things that really is something irregular. And the ones on page 286 in that chart of irregular superlatives, you really need to memorize those so that you'll know, hey, in Spanish it's something special as well. Okay, if you want to say my biology professor is the oldest in the school, again, that's going to come off of page 286, your irregular superlatives there, because you're not going to say el más mayor. You'll just say el mayor, meaning the oldest as far as age. El pollo de este supermercado es el más sabroso. El más, hang on. We don't need that S on the end there, but there's no way to erase just that part. It'll erase the whole slide. So let me, no S there. El más sabroso. And here we're referring to el pollo, which is singular and masculine. So that's where we got the L from. Más You know what? I read the wrong one. Extremely delicious would be es sabrosísimo. El más sabroso. How do I get rid of all these guys? Hang on just a second. Let me mark through this. That would work. That's not incorrect if you just want to say the most delicious or the best. But to say extremely delicious, what they're getting out there is trying to get us to use the absolute superlatives. So what we would do is take sabroso or rico and say sabroso was the adjective. We're going to drop the O and add isimo. Sabrosísimo. And we're going to add the isimo. Hang on just a second. Let me grab my. And then you got to have your accent mark over the I. Sabrosísimo. And then Carlos es el menor de mis hermanos is what we would use there for the youngest. And that one's coming off of page 286 as well for the as far as someone's age, el menor. Este plato es el mejor del restaurante, the best. And Sara es, if you wanted to say she's the tallest, you would just say la más alta. But if you want to say she's extremely tall, that's one of those absolute superlatives. So alta is the adjective, okay? And I'm going to type that just so you can see it. And the word, if it ends in a vowel, remember, you drop the vowel and then add isima or isimo or whatever your case may be. Here we're working with a singular feminine adjective because Sara is singular and feminine. And then we just need to stick our accent mark over this I, altísima. Okay? And hopefully these make sense for you. Hopefully as you go through the practice, they'll make sense. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me via email, and I'll be happy to help you figure out any questions that you have. What I'd like for us to do right now is I'm getting the schedule together for the oral interviews. That's 25% of your final grade, and we're going to be doing those in the next few weeks. And as you can only imagine, it's a little bit challenging to try and schedule all the students in the different sections that I teach because everybody's schedules are different and everybody has different hours, and I do too with my family and with my work. So what I want you to do here with this next question is please just give me an idea of what time or what days work best for you as far as scheduling the oral interview. If you're thinking about the dates for it, let me pull this up real quick. Hang on just a second. I had it scheduled for the week of a whole week, and it was going to be from Thursday, November 13th through Thursday, November 20th. And we're probably going to have to add in more days than that because I had some extra sections added on to my schedule. But basically what I'll do on the discussion board is have a place for you to say, hey, I want that slot Monday at 1 o'clock. But as I make that schedule, I don't need to have all daytime hours if most of my students need nighttime hours, if you get what I'm saying. And the interview will actually only take about 5 minutes, and you'll need to have internet access because we'll conduct the interview here in WIMBA. So just be sure that you are aware that that's coming up, and if you could help me out here with your answer to this question, I would really appreciate it. All right, well, hopefully you've had enough time to answer that question, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope this archive is helpful for you. Adios.